And I was in a really good mood. I thought, man, I'm going to make some serious bread tonight. It's Halloween in San Francisco. And I'm walking back to my cab. Out of the corner of my eye, I see him charging me like a bull with bad intentions.
Welcome to Atypical Daydream, a podcast about life on the road. I'm Josh, your host, and thanks for stopping by. My guest today is Flinn. He's a composer, drummer, percussionist, and teacher. Many of us live anchored and steady lives, not choosing to wander too far. Steven seems to have taken another path, with many bends in the river, some wild, some searching, but all with spirit.
I had been on the road and I had moved from Los Angeles to San Francisco. And I thought, well, I'm going to go straight. I'm going to try and get a day job. And I was applying to these tech companies and such. And because they were tech companies, I gather they were Googling me. And they wouldn't even give me an interview. So I thought, okay, I've got to get a hustle going. So I decided to drive cab in San Francisco. And I drove cab for 8 months at night and a few nights a week. Every year in San Francisco, there's what's called the Folsom Street Fair. And what it is, it's a fair that kind of celebrates the S&M lifestyle in San Francisco because the Folsom Street area south of Market is where all the S&M bars used to be. I'm not even really sure how many of them are left today. But it used to be a really wild event. And I was driving cab that afternoon, and I remember I was driving down from Diamond Heights, and I picked up these two gay gents that were on their way down to the Folsom Street Fair. And one of them was this big guy, man. He looked like he could have been a linebacker for the Packers, and he had the leather shorts on and the strap and everything. And his partner that he was with, he had on a dog collar and chain, a leash rather. And he had him on this leash, and he pulls them into the cab, and they're all leathered up. And so I'm talking to him. You know, I lived in San Francisco for the majority of my adult life, so, none of this really phases me. But I look back and I'm looking at the slave and I'm like, the guy's not talking and he doesn't look right. And I go, what's up with your friend? And he goes, well, he's my slave. And I go, yeah, but what's going on? And he goes, well, I decided he was talking too much, so I had his mouth sewn shut. So this guy had a fully, stitched up mouth. I guess he, got his nutrition through a straw of some sort. I was really taken back by that, and I took him down to the fair, and they went on their merry way. It was Halloween, and I was in a really good mood. I thought, man, I'm going to make some serious bread tonight. It's Halloween in San Francisco. If you've never been in San Francisco on Halloween, it's pretty crazy, and everybody goes out. And I remember I went down Sutter Street, and Sutter at Polk, there was this place that had great turkey burgers. So I pulled my cab up, got a parking place right in front, pull in, jump out of my cab, and this guy goes, "You got $5?" I'm like, dude, I just started my shift, first of all. And I'm like, why are you hustling me? I'm like, I'm a cab driver. Like, go bother somebody else. I didn't even say anything to him. I just didn't even acknowledge him. I went back and ate my meal. And I'm walking back to my cab, and out of the corner of my eye, I see him charging me like a bull with bad intentions. I jumped in the cab, hit the lock, and he jumped up on the hood of the cab, and his face is like, right on the glass right in front of me, and he's got this wild look in his eye, like he's on amphetamines or something, and his eyes are wide open, and he's holding onto the cab really tight. I'm like, dude, get the fuck off my cab. And he doesn't move. He seems like he's even more intense. And I'm like kind of afraid, because I'm like, does this guy have a gun? Does he have a brick? What's up with this guy? And I tell him again, get the fuck off my cab. And so he doesn't do it. And I said, okay, I'm gonna leave. And I didn't hesitate. So I started to slowly back up the cab. He didn't get off. And I I gunned it as hard as I could and turned the wheel, and he went flying off the cab. Like I could hear him off the roof, like. And I felt bad about it. It was like, I felt like my life was in danger, basically. I don't even think I stayed out the whole evening, but, it was really kind of a dangerous situation. And, I lived downtown, and I saw the guy like 8 months later walking around. So, I guess he survived the roll off the cab okay. It was another weekend. I think it was a Sunday, and I'm up on the Haight, and these 4 guys jump in the cab, and they've got a nitrous oxide container. And normally, I don't like to let more than 3 people in a cab. I never let anybody in the front seat, but they were really quick in jumping in. And I thought, okay. And they're in the cab, and they're all taking these hits of nitrous oxide, which kind of took me back. I'd never had that happen before. And they were trying to get me to do the nitrous oxide while I was driving. And I was like, at this point, I knew these guys were completely off the rails. And I was told, man, get that shit away from me. Went down a few more blocks, and the guy that was in front had this big ice cream cone, and he was just completely stoned out of his mind. And he goes, I'm going to jump out of the cab. And he opened the door, and he was about to fly out of the cab. And I grabbed him from the back of his jacket while I'm driving and pull him back in. The door miraculously shuts. And then I pulled the cab over and I said, look, you guys, do not fuck with me anymore. I was really angry. And they go, okay. I go, no more of this bullshit. And then they were on their best behavior. And I thought, I was really, really, I was very upset. And it was very stressful. And I get them down to the mission, and the guys in the back jump out, and they leave the guy in front with the ice cream cone with me. And he gives me the money for the cab, and then he gives me a $20 tip. And he goes, is that enough? And I go, fuck no. He gives me another 20. And he goes, is that enough? I go, keep them coming. He gives me another 20. He goes, is that good enough? I go, no, give me another one. He gives me like $100 in tips. I go, okay, that's good enough. Get out of my cab.
Hey, Josh here. I love making this podcast, and I'd love to make it my full-time gig. Besides telling the stories, I'm basically a one-man band, and that takes time. If you're enjoying the podcast, please consider becoming a patron. You'll have access to loads of great bonus stories, and you'll have the satisfaction of knowing that you're supporting a truly independent podcast. Find the Patreon link in the show notes. And thanks.
You want to hear my boxing story? Okay, so I firmly believe it's not what happens to us in life, it's how we respond to what happens to us in life. And I'm not going to go into all of the adversity, or I'm not really even going to go into it at all. Rather, I'm going to say that, I was directly affected by 9/11. I was living in New York City on 34th Street, and I had a lot of loss directly related to 9/11, and then indirect, a lot of indirect loss in a very short period of time. And unlike anything I'd ever experienced before. And in fact, I was so depressed. I had such situational depression after all this loss that a friend of mine had me talk to his shrink. And his shrink said that according to all of the professional rating systems that they use for stress, that I was completely off all the charts. And he actually thought that I was in danger of committing suicide, because when people are usually under such duress, it's very easy to snap. And I can honestly say I do kind of empathize with people that do snap, because I felt I was really, really close to snapping because of all the loss I had experienced in such a short period of time. So that's kind of the background. And so I ended up losing my home. I had a recording studio. I ended up losing that as well as a result of all this loss. And I ended up moving to Los Angeles. And I came to the conclusion that I was going to really need to work on changing my physiology as a way of addressing my physiological, situational depression that I was experiencing. I was like 40 years old at the time. I'm now 62. So what I did was, when I got to Los Angeles, is I had never boxed before. I had had a few rows along the way, but I'd never had any professional training. And a friend of mine suggested, who was a real authority on boxing, he suggested that I go down to LA Boxing, which is East Los Angeles downtown. I went into this gym and I was the only white cat in there. I felt like, well, I'm in the wrong house. It was really intimidating because this wasn't like some crunch boxing program. I mean, this was like hardcore boxing. Professionals were in there, amateur fighter. It was like serious boxing. They had 3 rings. I was like really intimidated. I guess as I think anybody really would be at this point. And I went to the bathroom and a voice told me, stay. I don't know where it came from. Maybe it was my higher power. So I went down to the desk. I said, sign me up. The very next day I was in there and this gent comes up to me and he goes, why are you here? I told him, I was real honest. And he said, I only work with professionals, but I'm going to work with you. I want you here every morning and at 6:30. And we're going to work together every day. He saved my life. His name was Huntley, and he was an ex-pro fighter and a really, really great trainer. And he worked with me. We worked Monday through Friday every morning. What happened is that all this pain and anger that I had, I buried down into my body, and that's what created, I think what created this really situational depression that I had that made it so difficult to function really. So it was, boxing's really primal. You're hitting shit, and although it is a sweet science, I mean, I look at boxing on the level of ballet in terms of art, the rhythm, the dance, everything, and boxing's a real subculture, and it was really great because nobody went by their name down there. Everybody goes by their boxing name, like Too Sweet, The Ghost, Bodacious, and which is really cool. You have to earn your name. They don't hand out, your boxing name like candy. You got to earn it. I remember when I first started sparring, you're supposed to spar with people in your weight division. You don't spar with somebody who's 30 pounds heavier than you. And there's kind of a school of thought in boxing that they want, if they're going to work with you, they want to know, really is this person going to dig deep? Are they really going to do it? And so they test you. I've heard of this happening to other boxers too. So when I first started sparring, they put me in there with this guy that was like 30 pounds heavier than me from Philly. He was cutting the ring off. I felt like I was standing in quicksand. He was like going to the body, and he was taking the wind out of me. He knocked me down. And I got up and I said, okay, game on. And I looked around and everybody around the ring had their jaw on the ground because they couldn't believe that I got up and I was ready to keep going after all that. And that's when I got my nickname, which is Downtown. But, we have choices, of how we respond to adversity. And one of the things I learned that was great from this experience was that if you do decide to, get up off the canvas and, do your best to get out of a situation like that, positive things will happen. Because I've had other adversities in my lifetime. And that's one of the good things about getting old too, is you get experiential knowledge about life. And one of the things that I've learned is that, if you keep your side of the street clean, great stuff will come out of adversity. I'm not glad that any of that stuff happened back in New York, but great things happened as a result.
I want to thank Steven for sharing his experiences. Make sure to check out his Bandcamp page and find him on Instagram at Steven_Flinn. This podcast was created and produced by me, Josh Caldwell. Music by Visual Aid, my side music project. General support and copywriting by Miranda Caldwell. If you like the show, please follow, subscribe, rate, and review wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you'd like to financially support the show, check out my Patreon page. You'll have access to loads of great bonus stories. You can find the link in the show notes. Thank you for listening, and I hope you come back next week.